In the deep halls of Arathon Prime, the Galactic Council's largest research fortress, a creature waited. His name was Rieger, the last living star dragon. Once, his wings had covered the skies, his roar had made empires tremble. Now he sat in a glowing containment cell, bound by magnetic chains stronger than steel. The walls around him pulsed with light, sealing him in a prison of humming energy. For years, scientists and soldiers came to study him. They watched from behind glass, taking notes as if he were only an object, not a living being. Rieger barely moved. When he did, the air around him rippled with heat. His golden eyes glowed like suns, but there was no fire left in his heart. Only silence. He remembered the last battle, the day his kind had fallen. The humans had not started that war, but they had ended it. Their ships had filled the stars, their weapons bright and cold. The dragons, once proud rulers of the heavens, had been hunted to extinction. Rieger was the last. And so they captured him, not to kill him but to keep him, a relic, a reminder, a warning. The guards feared him. No one spoke near his cell for long. His name was whispered in the corridors like a curse. When he stirred, the lights flickered and everyone stepped back. The officers said he was still dangerous, even in chains. They said his anger burned brighter than any sun. But they were wrong. Rieger was not angry. He was tired. Each day was the same. Cold lights, cold food, cold silence. He could hear the footsteps of soldiers, the hum of engines, the distant voices of people who thought themselves gods among stars. But none dared look into his eyes. None dared speak to him. Until one day something changed. It was a quiet afternoon in the lower halls of Arathon Prime. The guards were changing shifts. One of the technicians had forgotten to lock the maintenance corridor that led to Rieger's cell. A soft, quick sound echoed down the metal hallway, the sound of small shoes. Rieger lifted his head. His senses were sharp even after years in confinement. He smelled something faint, not metal, not oil, but something soft. Something human. A little girl appeared at the end of the hall. She could not have been more than 6 years old. Her hair was light brown, her eyes curious and bright. She wore a small jumper and clutched a stuffed rabbit in her arms. The guards shouted for her to stop, but she didn't seem to hear them. She walked past the warning signs, past the blinking red lights, and stopped just outside the shimmering energy field that sealed the dragon's cell. Rieger's breath rumbled deep in his chest. He was huge, his scales black and shining like polished stone. The girl tilted her head, unafraid. "Hi," she said softly. Her voice echoed through the chamber. "You look lonely." The dragon blinked. His eyes, sharp as fire, softened a little. No one had spoken to him like that in centuries. He didn't answer. He only stared. The girl smiled and stepped closer. The guards shouted now, running toward her, but she didn't look back. She held out her stuffed rabbit. "You can have this," she said. "He keeps bad dreams away." The massive dragon shifted. The movement made the air vibrate. The little girl giggled, thinking he was sniffing her toy. "You're funny," she said. Rieger tilted his head slightly. The sound of her laughter was strange, light and warm like sunlight through water. He couldn't remember the last time he had heard such a sound. "What is your name, little one?" he asked at last. His voice was deep, rough but careful. The energy barrier shimmered as his words rolled across it. "Mira," she said. "My mom works here. She says you're dangerous, but I don't think you are." Dangerous. The word echoed through his mind. That was what they all called him. Monster. Weapon. Beast. Never a name. Never a person. He stared at her for a long moment before replying, "You should not be here, Mira." "I know," she said simply. "But you looked sad. I just wanted to say hi." The guards reached her then. One of them, a young officer, picked her up gently and turned away. "Come on, kid, you're not supposed to talk to that thing." Mira frowned. "He's not a thing," she said. "He talked to me." The officer froze for a second. "He, what?" "He talked," she said again, smiling proudly. "He said my name." The guards looked at each other, uneasy. None of them had ever heard the dragon speak. Some thought it was impossible. But Rieger said nothing more. He only watched as they carried her away. When the lights dimmed that night and the fortress fell quiet, Rieger still watched the door where she had stood. The memory of her small voice lingered in his mind. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, the endless ache in his chest eased a little. He dreamed of a world long gone, a world of open skies and laughter that sounded a little like Myra's. In his dream he was not a prisoner. He was a father. When he woke, the dream faded, but the feeling did not. He lifted his head, looking at the barrier once more. For the first time since his capture, he did not roar. He did not curse. He waited. Somewhere deep inside something had changed. He no longer counted the days by the hum of the engines or the footsteps of guards. He began to count them by something new, the thought that maybe, just maybe, the little human girl might come back. And when she did, he knew he would be ready to listen. Because for the first time in centuries, the great dragon of the stars had heard a word that reached his heart. A word small and simple but powerful enough to calm the fire within him. "Hi, Dad." And in the cold, metal halls of Arathon Prime, the last dragon's heart began to beat again, not with fury but with something far greater. Something almost human. The next morning, the guards were surprised to see the little girl again. Mira had returned to the lower halls of Arathon Prime, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm and a smile on her face. Somehow, she had convinced her mother, Dr. Evelyn Hart, one of the senior scientists on the fortress, to allow her to visit. It took many promises and pleading eyes, but Evelyn had agreed as long as Mira stayed behind the safety barrier. The soldiers exchanged nervous looks as she walked down the corridor. No one else dared to approach the dragon's cell, not even the bravest among them. But there she was again, walking calmly as if she were visiting a friend. Rieger noticed her before anyone else. The faint sound of her small footsteps echoed down the metal floor. He raised his head slowly, the light from his golden eyes flickering against the walls. He had been waiting for her without realizing it. She stopped a few feet from the shimmering barrier and sat cross-legged on the floor. Her stuffed rabbit slipped from her arm and landed beside her. "Good morning," she said softly. Rieger blinked, studying her. He was used to screams, to the sound of weapons being charged, to cold voices giving orders. But her voice was calm, warm, alive. "You came back," he said. His voice was deep, like distant thunder. "Of course I did," Mira said cheerfully. "I said I'd visit you again." Rieger tilted his massive head, his horns glinting under the lights. "Do your people know you are here?" She nodded proudly. "Mum said I can come if I promise to be careful. She says you're very important." "I think she's right." A low rumble came from his chest, not a growl but something softer. It took him a moment to realize it was laughter. "Important," he repeated quietly. "That is not what your council calls me." Mira frowned. "They just don't understand you yet." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small paper folded in half. "I drew something for you." Rieger leaned closer, careful not to move too quickly. "A drawing?" "Yes." She held it up against the glass. It was a simple picture made with crayons. A dragon flying above a bright yellow sun, with a little girl standing below, waving. "See? That's you. And that's me." He stared at the picture for a long time. It was clumsy and uneven, but it was the first thing anyone had ever made for him. "You gave me wings again," he said softly. Mira nodded. "Because you'll fly again one day." Rieger's golden eyes flickered with something old and fragile. "You speak as if you know the future." She smiled. "Maybe I do. Mum says I have a strong imagination." He huffed, a small cloud of glowing air escaping his nostrils. "Imagination," he repeated. "That is a rare power." The guards shifted uneasily nearby. Some whispered to each other, but Rieger ignored them. His attention stayed on the child. Her words felt strange in his mind, light and innocent, yet powerful in ways that science could not measure. Mira began to hum softly, a tune simple and sweet. The sound filled the cell with warmth. The dragon's ears twitched. "What is that?" he asked. "It's a song my dad used to sing," she said quietly. "When I was scared, he'd hum it. It always made me feel safe." Rieger closed his eyes. For a moment he was no longer in a metal cell. He was somewhere far away, under a sky filled with stars. He remembered a time when his own daughter had sung to him, long ago before the war. When he opened his eyes again, Mira was smiling at him. "You liked it, didn't you?" she asked. "Yes," he said simply. "It is peaceful." "Then I'll sing it again next time," she promised. Rieger's claws curled slowly against the floor. He wanted to ask her many things, about her world, her family, her dreams, but he was afraid of frightening her. So instead he asked the one question that mattered most. "Why do you come here, Mira?" She thought for a moment before answering. "Because you look lonely. I know what that feels like." The great dragon lowered his head until his eyes were level with hers. "You are not afraid of me?" Mira shook her head. "You're big and a little scary but not bad. Bad people hurt others on purpose. You don't." He stared at her in silence. No one had ever spoken to him that way. To everyone else he was a weapon, a monster, a creature of destruction. But to this child he was just a person, a lonely one. "Mira," he said slowly, testing the name again. "You are strange." She laughed, the sound echoing softly in the quiet cell. "That's what Mum says too." He smiled then, or something close to it. It was awkward and small, but it was real. Hours passed before Dr. Evelyn came to collect her daughter. She watched in disbelief as Mira waved goodbye to the dragon and he lowered his massive head in return. "You must never cross that barrier," Evelyn warned as they walked away. "He's not like us." "I know, Mum," Mira said. "But he's not mean. He just needs someone to talk to." That night, Rieger didn't sleep. He stared at the crayon drawing taped to the inner wall of his cell. He could still hear the soft humming in his mind. For the first time in centuries, the silence didn't feel so heavy. He thought of the word she had said, safe. No one had ever made him feel that way before. He had always been the danger, never the peace. When the lights dimmed across Arathon Prime, Rieger whispered her name once, tasting it on his tongue like fire and sunlight. "Mira." And deep in the cold metal fortress, something within him began to change. The fury that had burned for centuries no longer felt endless. The walls still held him, but they no longer felt like a cage. For the first time he waited for morning, not out of anger but hope. He wanted to hear her voice again. He didn't know it yet, but that little human girl had done something no weapon, no war, no chain could ever do. She had reached the heart of a dragon. Weeks passed, and the fortress changed in small but clear ways. The halls no longer shook from Rieger's roars. The scientists who studied him began to notice strange readings on their screens. His fire had cooled, his heartbeat had steadied, and the air around his cell no longer rippled with heat. For the first time since his capture, the dragon's rage seemed to fade. Everyone wondered why. Some thought the magnetic chains had finally weakened him. Others believed the long years of isolation had broken his spirit. But the truth was simpler. It was because of a little girl who came to visit him each morning with a smile and a soft voice. Whenever Mira spoke, the instruments in the control room picked up a drop in energy spikes. When she laughed, the temperature near the cell fell to gentle warmth. The guards called it the Mira effect. Dr. Evelyn Hart watched closely, half amazed and half worried. She stood behind the glass most days, arms folded, observing as her daughter sat near the dragon, chatting as if he were an old friend. It was strange, even beautiful, but also dangerous. Evelyn knew what Rieger had done before. Entire fleets lost, planets burned, countless lives taken. And yet, as she watched the dragon lower his head carefully to listen to Myra's stories, she couldn't help but feel that something inside him truly was changing. Mira didn't see Rieger as the others did. To her, he was not a weapon or a monster. He was lonely. That was something she understood. Since her father's death, she had often felt alone too. The fortress was full of people, but few of them had time for a little girl. Her mother was always busy, her teachers were strict, and the soldiers avoided her, afraid of saying the wrong thing. But Rieger listened. He always listened. One afternoon, Mira sat cross-legged by the glowing barrier, humming softly. Rieger lay still, his head resting on the metal floor, his eyes half closed. "You're quiet today," she said. "I am thinking," he answered. "About what?" "About the stars," he said. "They used to sing to my kind. When we flew through them, we could hear their voices, faint like whispers." Mira tilted her head. "I've never heard stars sing." Rieger gave a small smile, showing sharp teeth that shimmered like gold. "Perhaps you will one day." She laughed. "I don't have wings." "Not all wings are made of bone and skin," he said. "Some are made of heart." Mira thought about that for a while. "Then I guess I do have wings," she said proudly. "Because I'm brave." "Yes," he said softly. "You are." From behind the glass, Dr. Evelyn watched, her heart torn. She wanted to pull Mira away, but she couldn't deny the sight before her. The readings on her tablet showed complete stability. The dragon's energy waves had evened out perfectly, his pulse slow and calm. It was impossible yet true. That night, when the fortress lights dimmed and most of the crew slept, Rieger sat awake in his cell. He stared at the small paper drawing Mira had taped to the inside of the glass, the one of him flying in a bright blue sky. He reached out a claw slowly, tracing the edge of it without touching. "Why do you care for me, child?" he whispered to the empty air. "Why risk your peace for mine?" He didn't expect an answer. But he thought he could almost hear her voice again in his memory, saying the words she had told him before, "Because you look lonely." He lowered his head and let out a low rumble, not of anger but of thought. For the first time in so long, he began to wonder if perhaps not all humans were cruel. The next day Mira came again carrying something new, a small book. Mum says this is a story about dragons, she said. Do you want to hear it? He nodded, folding his wings tightly. She sat down and began to read, her voice clear and full of wonder. It was a story about a dragon who guarded a mountain and the people who feared him. In the end, they learned he had been protecting them all along. When she finished, she looked up. I think you're like him, she said. You protect people even if they don't know it. Rieger's eyes softened. I have done terrible things, Mira. I have burned and destroyed. That is what they remember. But maybe that's not who you are now, she said. People can change. You can too. The words were simple, yet they struck him harder than any weapon. People could change. He had believed his fate was already written, to be feared, to be hated, to die alone in chains. But here was a child, so small and fragile, telling him he still had a choice. He lowered his voice. You speak as though you know truth better than the wise. She smiled. Maybe I do. Mum says truth is easy when your heart's not afraid. Rieger gave a quiet laugh, a deep rumble that made the floor vibrate. The guards tensed, but the sound faded quickly. You are wise, little one. Mira leaned forward, whispering, and you're kind even if you don't think so. The next day, when the scientists ran their scans, they found something extraordinary, a second heartbeat inside the containment chamber. For a moment, they panicked, thinking something had gone wrong. But it wasn't a second creature. It was Rieger's. His heart had grown stronger. Dr. Evelyn watched the data with tears in her eyes. She didn't understand it fully, but she knew it meant life, not death. When she tucked Mira into bed that night, the girl asked, Do you think Rieger is happy now? I think, Evelyn said softly, that he's learning to be. Back in the cell, Rieger closed his eyes and remembered her words. People can change. He had thought dragons were made only of fire and fury, but maybe that wasn't true. Maybe even a creature born of flame could carry light instead of destruction. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. The council could still decide to destroy him. The humans might still fear him. But as long as Myra's laughter echoed through the metal halls, he felt something he had not known for 1,000 years, hope. And so, the fortress that once held a monster now held something else. Not yet peace, but the beginning of it. And all because a little human girl saw the heart of a dragon and spoke to it as if it still mattered. One night, the fortress that had always felt safe began to tremble. The calm hum of machines turned into a deep roar, and red lights flashed along every corridor. Alarms wailed, sharp and shrill, echoing through the metal halls. Voices shouted over the intercom, "Reactor breach. All personnel evacuate." In the lower levels, the scientists ran back and forth, trying to understand what had gone wrong. The power readings were unstable. The main reactor that powered all of Arathon Prime had overloaded. Sparks burst from the walls and smoke filled the air. In her room, Mira woke to the sound of sirens. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, confused and scared. The floor shook beneath her and dust fell from the ceiling. "Mum," she called. "Mum, what's happening?" Dr. Evelyn Hart was already running down the hall, shouting her daughter's name. The lights flickered and panels burst open, spilling wires and fire. "Mira," she yelled again. Before she could reach the door, the floor gave way with a loud crack. A hole opened in the corridor, swallowing metal and flame. Evelyn stopped short, terrified, unable to cross. On the other side of the collapsing hallway, Mira stood frozen, eyes wide with fear. "Mum," she cried, her voice breaking. Evelyn stretched out her arm. "Stay there, sweetheart. Don't move." But the air filled with smoke and the fire spread quickly. Mira backed away, coughing, clutching her stuffed rabbit to her chest. Down in the containment sector, Rieger's eyes snapped open. He could feel the vibrations through the floor, the panic in the air. The alarms blared around him and emergency lights turned the walls crimson. The guards had abandoned their posts, running toward the escape pods. But through all the noise, the dragon heard one small voice, faint and distant, a child's cry. "Mira." He rose to his feet, his chains rattling. He tried to move forward, but the magnetic locks pulled him back. His heart pounded. He could feel the fear in her voice as if it burned in his chest. He had promised himself that no harm would come to her. He growled low and deep. The air trembled. The sensors on the wall screamed as power levels spiked. "Containment breach risk," the system warned. Rieger's eyes glowed bright gold. "Then break," he whispered. The energy field around his cell flickered and hissed. The chains that had bound him for years began to spark. One snapped. Then another. The magnetic cuffs glowed white-hot, then shattered into molten fragments. With a roar that shook the entire level, Rieger burst free. He spread his wings for the first time in decades, their tips brushing the walls. The lights blew out, plunging the sector into red shadows. He crashed through the heavy doors, the metal bending like paper beneath his claws. The corridors were filled with smoke and fire. Humans ran in panic, barely believing what they saw. The dragon, their prisoner, was loose. But Rieger ignored them all. His focus was on one thing. One heartbeat. One voice. He followed the sound through the chaos, his claws slamming against the metal floors. He reached the upper deck just as a section of the ceiling collapsed. Flames rolled across the hall, cutting him off from the child's voice. He took a deep breath and blew out a powerful gust of air, clearing the smoke. Then he saw her. Mira was trapped under a fallen beam, the fire creeping closer. Her little stuffed rabbit lay a few feet away, its fur singed. She was crying, her small hands pushing helplessly at the metal. "Dad!" she screamed, her voice hoarse. Rieger froze for a heartbeat. That word, Dad, gave him strength he didn't know he still had. He leapt forward, his claws digging into the floor, and ripped the beam aside like it was nothing. Mira gasped as light poured over her. Rieger lowered his head, his golden eyes soft despite the chaos. "I'm here," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "You're safe now." He reached out one claw carefully and lifted her into his palm. She clung to his scales, trembling but alive. Her small fingers curled around his thumb as if she had always belonged there. Behind him, the reactor alarm screamed louder. "Core unstable. Evacuate immediately." Dr. Evelyn appeared at the far end of the hall, her lab coat torn and face streaked with soot. When she saw her daughter in the dragon's hand, her heart stopped. "Mira," she shouted. "Put her down. Please." Rieger turned his great head toward her, his eyes meeting hers through the smoke. "She is unharmed," he said firmly. "But we must go." He looked back at the flames, then at Mira. "Hold on tight." With a powerful leap, he burst through the wall, his wings spreading wide. The explosion behind him threw sparks into the night. For the first time in years, Rieger flew. His wings caught the air awkwardly at first, but instinct guided him. He soared upward through the smoke, carrying the little girl close to his chest. Below them, Erathon Prime burned. The once calm fortress now glowed with fire and falling debris. Ships lifted off from the hangars, carrying survivors away. Rieger flew through the open dome, breaking into the night sky. The cold wind brushed against his wings, the stars reflecting in his eyes. Mira looked up, awed even through her fear. "You're flying?" she whispered. "So are you," he said softly. He landed on a high ridge far from the fortress. The air was thin and quiet. He lowered Mira gently onto the ground, his claws trembling from exhaustion. She ran to his snout and placed her hand on his scales. "You saved me," she said. Rieger looked down at her, his voice barely a whisper. "You saved me first." From the ridge he could see the fortress below, damaged but still standing. He could also see the human ships regrouping, their lights like tiny stars against the darkness. For a moment he wondered if they would come for him again. But then he looked at Mira and all fear faded. She smiled at him, small and bright, her hair glowing in the firelight. "You're not a monster," she said softly. He felt something break inside him, something heavy and old. "No," he said. "Not anymore." As the night wind blew over them, the great dragon lowered his head beside her, his wings folding close. The world was still burning, but in that small circle of light, there was peace. And for the first time, the people of Erathon Prime would wake to find that the creature they had feared for so long had been the one to save them all. When dawn came, the fires around Erathon Prime had burned low, leaving trails of smoke curling into the pale morning sky. The once great fortress stood scarred and silent, its towers cracked, its halls filled with ash. But life still stirred among the ruins, frightened voices, quiet sobs, and the soft footsteps of survivors searching for one another. On the edge of a blackened cliff, the great dragon Rieger sat still as stone. His wings hung folded against his sides, scorched in places but strong. His golden eyes, once filled with fury, were calm now, thoughtful, almost human. Beside him sat Mira. Her small hands rested on his claw as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She had fallen asleep there, her head resting against his scales. The faint morning light touched her hair, making it shine like gold. When the rescue ships of the Galactic Council landed, the air shimmered with bright beams and the hum of engines. Soldiers in silver armor stepped out first, weapons ready. They had come expecting a beast, a monster who had destroyed everything in a fit of rage. But what they found instead was quiet. The dragon made no move to flee or fight. He only turned his head toward them, his expression unreadable. The human child beside him stirred, blinking awake at the sound of the engines. "Dad?" she whispered sleepily, rubbing her eyes. "I am here," Rieger rumbled softly, his deep voice carrying warmth that even the soldiers could feel. Dr. Evelyn Hart was the first to step forward, her white lab coat streaked with soot and her eyes swollen from tears. She broke through the line of soldiers before anyone could stop her. When she saw Mira alive and unharmed, she ran. "Mira!" she cried, dropping to her knees beside her daughter. She gathered the girl into her arms, holding her close as if she might vanish. Mira smiled sleepily. "I told you he wouldn't hurt me," she said. Evelyn looked up at the dragon towering above her. "You saved her," she whispered, her voice trembling. Rieger's head lowered, his eyes soft. "She saved me long before I saved her," he replied. The soldiers shifted uneasily. The commander, a tall man named Captain Reeves, stepped forward. "Is this creature under control?" he asked cautiously. His hand hovered near his blaster, though he didn't draw it. Evelyn stood and shook her head. "No. He's not under control," she said firmly. "He made a choice. He protected us." Rieger's gaze moved to the humans gathering below. "I did what was right," he said simply. "Your kind taught me that." The council members, still in their shining robes, stepped out of their shuttle. They looked around at the damage, the broken towers, the burned halls. The eldest among them, a woman with gray eyes and a calm voice, spoke first. "You were our prisoner, dragon. And yet you saved the lives of those who caged you. Why?" Rieger looked down at Mira, who was watching him with a quiet smile. "Because one small voice called me Dad," he said softly. "And in that word I remembered what it means to protect." The council murmured among themselves. It was hard for them to understand that something so ancient and fierce could feel compassion. But the evidence was there before them. The fortress still stood, the survivors alive, and the dragon sitting peacefully beside a child. Captain Reeves cleared his throat. "What do we do with him then?" he asked. "We can't cage him again. He'll never allow it." The councilwoman studied Rieger for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "He shall remain here," she said. "Not as a prisoner, but as a guardian." Evelyn looked up in surprise. "A guardian?" "Yes," the councilwoman replied. "He has already protected this station once. Let him protect it again by choice, not by chains." Rieger bowed his head slightly. "I will accept," he said. "As long as the child may visit me." Mira grinned. "I was going to anyway," she said. The council smiled faintly at her boldness, then returned to their ship, leaving behind a new beginning where fear had once ruled. The soldiers lowered their weapons, relief spreading across their faces. As the morning light grew stronger, workers began repairing what was broken. The fortress that had once been a prison would soon become a home again, a place watched over by both dragon and human. Evelyn crouched beside Rieger one last time before leaving with Mira. "Thank you," she said. Rieger's golden eyes glowed faintly. "Take care of her," he said. Evelyn smiled sadly. "I think she'll take care of all of us." Days turned into weeks. Erathon Prime began to heal. The people stopped whispering the word monster. Instead they told stories, of the dragon who saved them, of the fire that destroyed and renewed, and of a small human girl who spoke to a creature no one else dared approach. Every evening, when the sky turned red with the light of distant suns, Mira would return to the courtyard where Rieger waited. She would sit beside his folded claws, telling him about her day, about new friends and small adventures. He would listen quietly, his eyes warm. Sometimes he would tell her stories too, of stars long gone, of worlds where dragons once flew free. She loved those stories most. One night, as they watched the stars together, Mira leaned against his claw and said, "You're not alone anymore, are you?" Rieger looked up at the stars that had been his prison for so long. "No," he said softly. "I am home." High above, the sky shimmered with light from passing ships, like tiny candles across the dark. And below, on the quiet ridge, a dragon and a little human sat side by side, watching the universe wake to a new dawn. No one feared him anymore. They called him Guardian of Erathon Prime. But to one small girl he was simply Dad. And that was enough.